Welcome to Section 6, Real-World Tips and Tricks. Over this section, we're going to tie up loose ends of our application. There's still some work missing. Also, we're going to learn how to pass data from the outside into Vue in real application context. We're going to use Vue with an existing stack, using Vue mixins and plugins with production tips, and also I want to have you preparing your next steps going forward. In this video, we're going to tie up our loose ends of our application. In detail, this means we're going to implement the form for updating contacts. We want to finish the contact creation flow. We want to add filtering support to our sidebar, and maybe give an overview to potential next steps. Alright, here back at our beautiful application, we see our form, and if we click to another user as before, we see that we just render ID and everything in there. Ideally, we now use our form component to render the contact here with all its information and allowing us to update everything. We already did some pre-work and we're going to leverage this yet. Alright, here we're back at our beautiful show component. That's basically we already import form correctly here and everything is kind of prepared. So let's do the final steps. First of all, let's remove contact. In this case, let's just take the form component that we have in here already, and the submit button text will now be update contact. Submit will again fire the submit method in here. Here we still do console log data. Let's leave it for this for now. Let's just see if the form gets up and loading. So the next important piece is we somehow need to tell the form about our contact. If we check out the form component again, we only take a prop of submit button text so far. And we have the availability of if we submit anything, we just send the data to the outside. So we also now need support to passing in data from the outside. So how can we do this? So first of all, let's start a new property. We're going to do details. And then we're going to call it like a default should be like an empty object for us. If we call details and nothing gets passed in, let's say function return an empty object. All right. So the next important piece in our puzzle would be that we take the methods here. We use what Vue has to offer for us. In the past, we used lifecycle methods like mounted or updated. In this case, we're going to be a little bit more specific and use a watch method, because we can do more fancy stuff than with the updated hook in this case. And we only care for specific updates in our component and not for all the updates. So in this case, we're going to watch details, and we don't call a function directly. We're going to pass in an object. And there's a cool, nice hook that's called immediate. What immediate means is as soon as our component is ready, fire this watcher at least once. Usually watchers just fire when something changes and everything. If we want to fire the hook that we associate to it directly, you can pass in the immediate function. The next thing is we pass in a handler. The handler is actually the function that should run, that will receive a value. What's the latest updates or the latest details. And what we're going to do with those details, if is empty, if the value is empty basically, we return, and we don't want to do anything. If we don't have the isEmpty method yet initiated here, let's just import it directly on top. Let's say import isEmpty, and we can pull this one in from Lodash directly. All right. So the next thing is we then want to kind of have this.data and we want to assign it with the value. So that could be a little tricky to do. Luckily, we have our merges already prepared. So if you recall, in lib, we have the transformers. And there is this merge details and extract details, and we're already using this one. So let's use the merge details now as well. So let's say merge details, and with this data we want to merge the value, or we directly reference this details. So merge details is not defined, so we need to import it again. So let's import it. Import merge details from /lib/transformers. Alright, here we are. So in our show component, let's take what we have here, and that's where we need to pass in the details. So let's take details equals, and we already have the contact here completely ripped out for us as we wanted. So let's pass in the contact. Let's save this and give it another shot. Okay, we see our form getting loaded correctly. All the information of John is in here. If we switch over to Jane, we see all information getting updated. So that's a good way of showing a reusable component, having the same one for creating new contacts and sharing the details of contacts. And we now have data stored in a very clean way and take it out and merge it back in as we need it. Alright, there's just a little thing to do for us. In our form, we again submit the data, and we want to submit everything to the outside world. So there's two things we need to do. First of all, import map actions from Vuex, because we want to update the contact, and we want to import extract details from /lib/transformers. So let's scroll down to our methods. First of all, let's import our action for the update contact functionality. And all we need to do now is to call this dot update contact in our submit method. So there's one little trick though. If we just take the extract details and pass in the data, as we did in the new function, there's a problem. We don't know about the ID yet, because the form also doesn't know the ID. But we have the ID in this component. That's why already it pays off to have the data submitted happening outside of the form component. So let's create contact equals a new object. And what we're going to do is say this ID is actually this.userID, because we have it in here. And we're gonna take the extract details of data, and we're just going to spread it in here. So we have all the data in one contact object. So what we need to do is call this contact. And that should do the trick for us. Our store has everything prepared for us. The update contact method expects one contact with an ID and all the rest of the information there. Also, our mutation that's called there takes a contact and takes the ID and the contact from there. That should update everything for us. So in the browser, we see John. Let's give him a new name. And we see John Fu reflected here in the sidebar. And if we switch data, we still get everything here updated accordingly. And we know it's now synced to Firebase. That's what we want to do. Let's jump right back into our store. If we inspect our add contact method in the store, we see that we create a contact, but we don't do anything else with the data. And we can create new contacts, but we always have the reference to the old one. That's not what we want to have eventually. The easiest way is to route to a new page, in this case to one that we already have with the details page. So first of all, we now have to spread this one up or so because we have multiple functions in our callback function. Let's format this a little bit. So the big question is, how do we get a router into our store action? The easiest way is just pass it in as a parameter. Let's take here the router. And so that all that we need to do eventually is take router and pass it in to our store action when we actually want to call it. So in our new component, if we now call this add contact and spread contact to the extract details and router and pass in this router as a reference, that's the perfect point for us to have access to everything that's happening in our current instance routing. So let's give it one shot. Let's create a new contact. Simone, create contact. And we see we have Simone here and we got redirected to this page here. So whenever we call new contact, we are actually on a new contact page already, and we have access to Simone as its own entry and its own page perfectly as we want it. This leaves us with our final challenge. The list component in our sidebar, we want to be able to show only filtered items based on the input field. So, currently we loop through all the contacts. Let's put to good use everything we've learned so far. Let's create a new computed property we call filtered list. So by default, it should definitely return contacts all. In this case, of course, we need to say this, contacts all. We need to replace it here and call filtered list instead. So what happens if we have a filter applied? That's quite easy to check. We have our data here. So the easiest way for me, I like to call it, say, this dot filter, and then I want to trim it to account for white spaces to happen, and I just want to know if its length is larger than 0, if there's anything in there. That's the point when we want to actually call the if function and return a filtered list. So, as this is an array, we can call the filter array method on it and define a function here by which predicate it would be filtered. I like at this point also to split it up to make it as readable as possible. So I tend to define my filter on top. So I can say const filter equals, and we will just create an inline function here. In this case, use the ternary function again to don't lose context to the this world. So what we want to do is, first of all, we get the contact in here. So I call it C, and I want to check that C.name includes this, that filter, and that's the string that we want to turn by. So let's just return this predicate. And we need to pass in the filter here. So there's one problem though. We have, for example, the contact is named Simone, but we search for something like S. Then this would currently fail because it's an uppercase S and not an S, and that kind of is not being matched by the includes filter. So we need to create an even play field. I like to do this by just calling the to lowercase on where I need it. So let's say this to lowercase. We have the name in lowercase, and also we want to have the filter on to lowercase. This will guarantee that both strings are only checked in their lowercase state, and therefore Simone will be turned to Simone with a small s, and the smaller s will also capitalize and find it accordingly. So we see our contacts. Let's use a small s, let's use an uppercase S, let's use an O, H, and we see that it's all working as we want to. And it would even work with N space F, because it tries just to merge anything in here accordingly. So this video concludes everything we do to our application. Feel free to go through the files, do some updates, add some loading support, make the UI a little bit better. There's a lot of things you can do. I hope you feel at home in all the components and everything you've created. Give them your own unique touch, add fields, play around with everything as you like.